you backstage. I'm gonna bring up Brass, and I'll bring you up next. Just fix your mic and video. Brass, Mr. Brass, of the select group of deists that congregate on X. My buddy, Mr. Brass, another ex-deist. How are you doing, my friend?
How are you doing, my good sir? I'm doing very well. I decided I would just stop in order to get a conversation going with you on some matters.
Sure,
Yeah.
buddy. What's on your mind?
Um. Yeah. Like. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Topic I was going to bring up is like on. I remember this was actually a disagree one of our few disagreements on. I remember on a live stream, I can't remember which one it was, but it was on a specific live stream where I'd asked the question, do you believe that Christians and deists worship the same God? And your answer was more or less yes. And mine is more so in the no category, but I do get the political need to do that.
So it's interesting because I think that there's one of the problems with deism is you meet seven deists and you'll get seven different versions of deism, which is, we're a little bit like cats. We don't like to be herded. So if the claim was like what I'm going to call like strict Thomas Paine style deism, where you're saying God created and then took his hand off. He wound up the clock and he let it go and he never intervened again. That is directly that's contradictory to Christian teaching. Now, does that mean that they're different? It's a different God? That I don't know. Why wouldn't it be more likely that it's the same God and just that like that the Thomas Paine style deist or the Christian, one of the two, is wrong about something about the nature of God rather than it being a different God that they're worshiping altogether?
Well, the way that I sort of see it is like, let's say you have let's say you have two people that both think that they've read Harry Potter. And like one person is saying that, Harry Potter's like the stereotypical young British man with the scar on his head and all that. And another person is saying that Harry Potter is a 7 foot tall basketball player who just knows how to use a wand. Well, in that case, we would both say, like, both these people are claiming that they have read Harry Potter and that they know the character Harry Potter, but it's clear that they have different conceptions of who Harry Potter actually is. Now, what I have said is that I actually do get from a political stance the need to do this sort of thing, but I also don't think, for example, that it's necessary for us to have the same belief in the same God in order to make political inroads. Because, for example, I know plenty of atheists and Christians that work together when it comes to conservative policies. Like, they disagree on the question of God altogether, but like they don't have the same conception of God. One doesn't even believe in God, but they both can make political inroads. So I do get like how we want to say that we worship the same God in an attempt to draw like a bigger political faction together.
Well, but I guess I was doing like the maximalist Thomas Paine version, but if you look at like my beliefs, which are kind of, I don't, I'm somewhere between like a deist and a bare theist in this way. Like my beliefs are much more like I believe in God, and then I'm agnostic and trying to figure it out beyond that point because I don't believe I have sufficient evidence of any particular claim of revelation or miracle that I can accept it as true, which rules out the Gospels as like sources of fact.
Yeah.
So, like in if to take your Harry Potter example, my belief system versus the Christian belief system is I'm saying there is Harry Potter and I'd like to learn more about him. And they're saying Harry Potter is a 7 foot tall basketball player. And I'm saying, I don't know if that's right, but if it is, that's interesting. Like
Yeah.
it's not clear that there's a contradiction there. It's just like, they could be wrong. I just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do sort of get that sort of line of reasoning. And like I said, I've worked with Christians where I do think, let's say, on Western civilization matters, like on values,
Mm-hmm.
I see myself aligning with many conservative Christians, even though we obviously disagree on the God question. So I personally don't think it's like necessary to have like that an inroads, like if one wants to have them as friends or whatever. And for me, I also wanted to go into like the second topic that I was going to go into is with if you were familiar of the concept of this is a moral one, but of the ideal observer. If you were aware of that sort of concept.
I'm not exactly positive. Is it the idea of idealism, where like if everything exists only in the mind, how do we know that the chair's there? Well, there's an ideal observer, which would be God. So God's always looking at the chair. So even if no human has the chair in mind, the chair still exists. That sort of thing. Or are you talking about something different?
Well, this is more of in the moral sphere of
Mm-hmm.
things. That's more of like I think that's more philosophy of the mind.
Yeah, and
But
realism. Yeah.
yeah, um, in ethics, ideal observer it talks more about like you know this as a lawyer, where there's sort of a fiction like where there it's called the reasonable man
Mm-hmm.
fiction, where we like to imagine. Let's say we have this maximally rational man who is just with no biases, no preconceptions, is just looking at the data and from this perfectly rational man standard, can we say this person did X, Y, and Z? Now, we both admit that this is a fiction. No actual perfectly rational,
Mm-hmm.
no biased man actually exists, but it's a useful fiction that we use because it makes doing court proceedings and stuff easier. Um,
Yeah,
the I
though we don't use perfectly reasonable in court. We just say because we don't require perfection. We just require reasonable, which is a lower standard. But yeah.
Yeah, but like like basically, and the ideal observer is sort of plays on that notion
Mm-hmm.
where it's not exactly like it's naturalistic in the sense that you don't have to be a theist in order to subscribe to it. You could say it's more of a psychological construct that we have created. Like, you know how people say like WWJD, like what would Jesus do or
Yeah.
whatever. That's sort of what ideal observer theory is where it makes you say, all right, let's imagine that we had this ideal observer with perfect morality. How would we like go about following this perfect ideal observer? And it sort of works to the same thing as the rational man standard, where we're not exactly saying, oh, this rational man actually exists, although theists will say that this ideal observer is ultimately God.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, it's not a requirement, but it's also not like forbidden either. So I was just thinking your perspective on that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess can we back up a second? Like, on your conception of deism, are you kind of if I recall correctly, you're a Thomas Paine, wind the clock, let it go sort of guy, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that
in that regard, with Thomas Paine. I mean, obviously I'm not like 100% like politically agreed with on Thomas Paine because, Thomas Paine was like for as brilliant as a man as he was when it came to many of his politics, he obviously had ethics that I would disagree with in today's view. Like,
mhm.
he was a racist and an anti-Semite back because that was just like the conception back then, what like everyone was pretty much, or at
So
least people in
what,
his
what
sphere.
what what I was getting at, Brass, is on that belief that God just wound up the universe and let it go and never intervened again. Is God still an observer? Like, is God like which is that's an interesting question. Like, if God is not intervening, but on your view, is God still observing and like casting judgment, even if he's not?
intervening in any way? Well, I sort of see it like the whole video game analogy, where let's say some like you're like let's say you're a video game like programmer or something, and your job is to create a simulation of a video game. Well, if you just decide like after you've made the video game and the simulation that I'm just going to be hands off, there's a sense in that your work is still observing in the sense that you've created something that has the blueprints of a rational mind, which you can trace back using logic and reason. And in that sense, what your ethics and stuff would fall from your programming.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm getting at is that because one of the tricks, one of the big questions on deism, and I think you could go either way with it, is, you know, do you? I remember I did a discussion with Alex a few years ago, who's a friend of the channel, obviously, and a fellow deist, where we agree God exists, but he would not ascribe the omnis, omnibenevolence, omniscience, omnipotence to God, because he didn't want to inherit the problem of evil, which he thought was too big a problem. And I've been leaning towards ascribing the omnis, and I can tell you why if that's of interest, but I've been leaning towards it because I think not having the omnis is actually a bigger problem. He's recently changed his mind on that. So I guess but I guess what I was getting at with you is like, if God is the ideal, if God is omni-rational, is that the only omni that you're ascribing to God, or is he also omniscient and omnibenevolent and omnipotent?
I would say from our perspective looking in, like I like to use the video game analogy from like a perspective like if we're in a video game, then whoever built us from what our perspective, they might as well be omniscient and omnipotent because they could just turn us off like right in an instant. So from our perspective, yeah, they might as well be.
And omnibenevolent?
To me, I've always had sort of a mixed bag relationship on that because I also don't want to, because a problem that I find is getting into caricatures of God where God sort of becomes a Superman like character. And so I do think that one can derive, for me personally, I don't pray because, in the sense that I might pray for thanks, like, say, thank you, God, for the life you've given me in that sense. But I don't say, oh, hey, God, I want a pony. Can you give me a pony? Like, I don't pray in that sense. But for me, I can't really say for sure if I would say God is like omnibenevolent. I would hope he is, but I can't really say for sure one way or the other.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's coming right off that Casimir conversation. Here's what I'm toying with. I'm not going to claim this is a perfected argument. I'm still kicking the tires on it, but here's the rough blueprint of the argument. My starting point in terms of epistemology is common sense realism. So I believe that we do see the real world. This is why the argument with Casimir was funny, because he kept saying, like, how could you prove that we find a contradiction, that we don't see the real world? I'm like, I can't, because I think we do. I think this problem emerges on other worldviews, not on mine. So I believe that we do see the real world, and that we have a direct connection to it. From there, you derive the existence of God.
Yeah.
Great. Now, here's the problem. If God is not omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient, that would create a reason to doubt common sense realism, from which you derive to the whole worldview, right? Because if God is not all-knowing, all-good, and all-powerful, then it's possible that he could have created a world that would include Cartesian doubt. But Cartesian doubt, of course, must be rejected. But of course, like if God was, for example, not all-powerful, then maybe despite his best intentions, he got something wrong. Or if he's not all good, then that doesn't rule out the Cartesian demon. So if you don't have the omnis, I'm not sure. Like you haven't ruled out the trickster God, right? So
Yeah.
that's the problem that I'm trying to work through right now. Is it seems like you almost have to grant the omnis, otherwise you don't rule out things that you functionally have to rule out. You have to rule out the trickster god example.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that's sort of interesting. Oh, and one more thing. I remember you had said it warms your little heart when someone mentions that they brought up your podcast to a neighbor or something. And
Yeah.
I said, Ryan, you know damn well you're a lawyer, so you treated your heart years ago.
Yeah, Mr. Brass's role is to remind me of the moral problems with my profession. But Mr. Brass has a YouTube channel. I know you've been talking to is it AI Eric Bischoff?
Yeah.
Having little short snippets of conversations with AI. Is it about wrestling, or is it just you want to talk to Eric Bischoff about life?
Basically, it actually was funny because I just wanted content to go to at first, and I was having a hard time thinking. Well, I mean, I am a wrestling fan. I said, so what the hell? I'll just get an AI Eric Bischoff on there, and I'll just ask it philosophy. I'll be just ask philosophy questions and history questions or whatever I could think of on the top of my head, and say, all right, I can just churn out content on this for a while.
Yeah, man. Well, is the name of your channel Mr. Brass?
Yeah, it's yeah that yeah or Brass Vaughn, whatever works.
Yep, and you can also find him on X. And shout out if you want to join on my profile on X. There is a deist community, which I keep forgetting to check if people have applied for membership for. But which sometimes there's a backlog. But if you are interested in deism, we also have a group chat on X. So if you follow Mr. Brass, join the deism community, and we'll chat about God to our heart's content. Well, Brass, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate you, buddy.
All right, yeah, nice seeing you too, bro. You
Talk
have
soon.
fun. You too, bro.
All right.